Hello and welcome back to my channel. Today I will be doing a January wrap-up, and specifically I will be talking about all the books I reread for Read It Again January. So for January I decided to do a little reading project where I would only reread books. Now I did end up reading two new to me books as well, which was the pick for the Book Naturalist book club for January and the book for the TBR spin, but I won't be talking about those today. Today is just the books that I reread. So the first book I picked up was The Essex Serpent by Sarah Perry. This was my pick for a second chance book. I made myself like a little bingo board with different prompts, and one of them was a second chance book, so a book that maybe I wasn't completely enamored by the first time around, but I thought would deserve a second chance, or a book that I maybe thought I would enjoy more on a second read. Unfortunately, this wasn't a great success. In fact, I think I liked it even less than the first time around, and I ended up not finishing this book. I think mainly just because I wasn't interested in the stories or the characters, which is such a shame because the premise of this book just sounds right up my alley, and I should, in theory, be very invested in the story. So it's about a young woman named Cora, and she has recently become widowed. And you learn in the beginning of the book that even though her husband was very well respected in his community, behind closed doors and in their marriage he was kind of an asshole. So Cora actually feels this sense of relief, but outwardly she has to appear as a grieving widow. So Cora and her son move out to the countryside, and there they learn about the legend of the Essex Serpent, which was a mythical creature that allegedly roamed the marshes, and rumor has it that the Essex Serpent has returned. This is set in the late 19th century when looking for fossils and trying to discover new species was a very popular Victorian pastime. So in theory this should be one I love. It's historical fiction, it has a female main character discovering herself and going on a new path. There's a folkloric element to it. There's all things I love in this book, but I just wasn't interested. I didn't care. I think with a main character, I don't have to like them, but I do have to care about them. I have to care about what happens, and I have to want to know what's going to happen. And with this, I felt like I was just reading it for the sake of reading it. And when I realized that I didn't really care about whether she finds this creature or not, I didn't care about her relationships with other people, then it just becomes words on a page without meaning. And I thought, well, what's the point of reading on? So I DNF'd this book, and that's just the end of me and this book. Luckily, I fared a lot better with the rest of the books I picked up for the month. So the first book I finished was Crow Lake by Mary Lawson. I read this for the first time last June, and it ended up on my favorite books of 2023 list. It's about a young girl who lives on a very remote farm in northern Ontario in Canada with her two older brothers and a baby sister. And right at the beginning of the book, their parents die in a car accident. And the book is basically about these children trying to make it on their own, and especially how it impacts her relationship with her eldest brother, who becomes her legal guardian. And it's just one of these very quiet, beautifully written character study kind of books, and I loved it just as much as I did the first time around. Then I read How to Breathe Underwater by Jullie Orringer. This is a short story collection. I read this for the first time, I think, about 10 years ago, maybe even longer. so I couldn't really remember the stories, but as I started reading them, they definitely came back to me. These are all stories about young children and teenagers. I think all girls, but I'm not entirely sure now. All of them are going through something, struggling through some changes in their lives. They are about the loss of innocence, sibling rivalry, jealousy in friendships. I think Jullie Orringer really captures that particular loneliness and cruelty in a young girl's mind so well. And she points to that pivotal point in a person's life where nothing will ever be the same again. I didn't enjoy all the stories equally, but they are all very distinct, and I love how they are realistic stories, but then they have this real dark, melancholic undertone to it. They are morally grey, and when you finish these stories, often you are not sure what to think, and that's why they linger in your mind. Maybe because of that, I think these are actually great for people who are new to short story collections. Yeah, I think this is a pretty good place to start. Speaking of morally grey, dark, melancholic stories about teenage girls, next I reread The Virgin Suicides by Eugenides. So this was a book that was first published in 1993, and I think we could call it a modern classic now, although I feel it's weird calling books that are younger than me modern classics, but maybe that says more about my age than the book. This is one of those books that if you ask me 15 or 20 years ago what my favorite book is, this could have been one of them, and I do think it holds up. I mean, I don't think I would consider it an all-time favorite anymore, but I was still just as impressed with the way it was written. So this is the story about the Lisbon girls. They are 5 sisters who live in a quiet suburban neighborhood in the States. I can't remember if it is specified in the story in which particular city they live, but I don't think it really matters. And over the course of 1 year, these sisters all take their own lives. And the story is told from the perspective of a group of boys. They are neighbors to the Lisbon girls, who look back on that particular year. They tell what they remember, but they've also since spoken to other people who knew these girls, and they reconstruct what they think has happened and why they all committed suicide. I think the way the story is written is so uniquely done. The collective we, the obsession, the adolescent male gaze that we experience through the eyes of these boys. That's why I can't say that I liked this story. It's about the sexualization of these girls. It's dark and creepy and voyeuristic. I don't enjoy the objectification of these girls, but it's just really well done. It's a coming-of-age story with a lot of teenage angst about a disintegrating family in modern suburbia. The narration of this book is just so distinct. I don't think I've read anything like it since. And for me to recognize that style of writing within a few sentences after I hadn't read it for nearly 2 decades, I think that's a big credit to the writing. Then I reread a non-fiction book, No Visible Bruises by Louise Snyder. The subtitle is What We Don't Know About Domestic Violence Can Kill Us. This is a book about domestic violence, or intimate partner terrorism as the preferred term is, and specifically about extreme cases where this results in femicide. And what she tries to show in this book is that domestic violence can be seen as a global epidemic, and she addresses common misconceptions like it only happens to an unlucky few, it is something that happens because of poor choices. If it was really that bad, these women would leave. their situation. She divides this book in 3 parts. The first is about the victims, the second about the perpetrators, and the last one about professionals like police, healthcare workers, people working in shelters, etc. Obviously, since I've read this book before, it didn't teach me anything new. But even so, I think the topic is important enough to remind myself of it, remind myself of the devastating numbers, of the signs of domestic abuse, any sort of markers. I've been discussing the topic with some people at work. I work in healthcare, and I think we could probably signal a lot more domestic violence if we knew what to look for or listen for. And we've also been discussing like what we could do if we do signal something. So we're going to get a lot more training in that, which is very important. So I liked how this book has sparked action within me and within my work environment. But yeah, I think even if this is not something you deal with professionally, I still think this is a very eye-opening read. It really shows how domestic violence is the result of a system at work. You can't pinpoint it to one thing. It is often an accumulation of different factors, like within a deep-rooted patriarchy that makes it difficult for victims and perpetrators and society as a whole to step out of their roles within this system. So yeah, I think it's a very important book to read. The only thing I will say is that the second time around I noticed more clearly that structurally this book wasn't always sound. It has these 3 obvious sections, but within them it kind of jumps about a bit. The author repeats herself a fair few times. I just feel like it needed another edit just to streamline it a bit more. And then one other tiny thing as well, in the literal sense of the words, is that the font of this particular copy of the book is tiny. I mean, what's up with that? But yeah, a must read in my opinion for the topic it addresses, and also in how well-rounded a view the author takes in this book. And the last book I reread in January was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I read this book whilst at the same time also listening to the audiobook narrated by Juliet Stevenson, which I find works really well for me when reading classics, because I just get the most out of it that way. And this is the one book where I'm not even sure I could count it as a reread. I know I've read it before because I've marked it as read on my Goodreads, but I couldn't remember a single thing when going into this book, and nothing came back to me when I was reading it either. But yeah, that's neither here nor there. This is a great book. I had a lot of fun. It tells the story of Kathleen Morland. She is a teenage girl. I think she's 17 at the start of this book, and she's going to spend a season in Bath to experience the culture and social scene. She's a little bit naive. She loves reading, especially sensational novels, and she kind of sees herself as the heroine in her own story. She has this really overactive imagination, and she's constantly looking for stories and intrigue, when in reality there's just not that much happening. This book was so witty. I think Jane Austen always has a very keen observation of society and interaction, but especially in this book she was so sharp and so cutting. And then Juliet Stevens's narration was so brilliant. Like, she has this very proper British accent. She's very deadpan, and then it just makes you go back and think, wait, did she just say what I think she said? Yeah, it made me laugh out loud on numerous occasions. I think the plot overall left a few things to be desired. I mean, the main event of the book is that Catherine Morland is invited to stay at Northanger Abbey, where obviously the title of the book comes from. She's very excited about staying in an old abbey because because that to her is like staying at a real life location of her favorite gothic horror books. I feel like most of the actual plot of the book happens there, and also the more interesting character development happens when it is set there, but it is not until we are like well into the second half of the book until the story actually moves there. So yeah, I had a really good time with this book. It was such a pleasant surprise to me, because I often feel like a lot of people consider this their least favorite Austen novel, but I thoroughly enjoyed myself with this one. So these were all the books I reread for Read It Again January. So how do I feel about the project as a whole? Well, I had a really good time. I think I might do it again next year. I think especially the sort of mindfulness exercise of this I really enjoyed. January is of course a time when a lot of people, me included, are setting reading goals. Everyone is really eager and excited to start working on these goals and embark on new reading projects. So for me, January felt like a really good transition period where I could spend some time thinking about what I wanted for the next year, and just be chill about reading, because I still have 11 months left in the year, so that's plenty of time. And because I wasn't allowed to read from my TBR, I'm now even more excited to get to these books. So yeah, I think I will do this again next year. I'd love to reread more throughout this year as well. And I think it was just a really good start of the reading year. That's it for today. If you have any thoughts on the books I've talked about today, any thoughts on rereading, if you just want to say hi, please leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.